Hello and welcome to the 17th video in this series making simple floppy robin for Android using Cocos2dx. So we're drawing slowly, ever closer to moving over to Eclipse and Android. We've got two more things to do. One in this video is the settings scene, and in the next video we'll be looking at how we deal with multiple resolutions and different aspect ratios. So the first thing I want to do in this video is inside the game manager.cpp. I just want to, where we set the background music volume here, is actually copy this line, and then when we set the music volume here, is just drop that line in there so that in the settings scene, or settings layer, when we actually come to click increment the volume up or down, it changes this volume each time. The next thing I want to do is in hello world scene.h is just at the top declare yet another label. And I'm going to call this settings label, if I can get the cursor in the right place anyway. And inside hello world scene.cpp we're going to start setting up our settings label. So I'm just going to take this code here and call it settings label, and we'll just put settings in capitals. We'll leave the font size the same. Position we'll come to in a minute. Visibility doesn't matter, but what we do need to do is set the anchor point, and we want the anchor point here, and you'll see why in a minute, to be a 1 by 1, because I want to leave a gap basically at the top, to the top and to the right hand side of the screen. It's going to be in the top right hand corner, so we'll just take the settings label and copy this here and add child settings label, and the z-index robin is okay. And the last thing then to deal with there is the settings sort of gap, and we're going to set that to 24. So I'm just going to take this 24 here, and we'll call this settings gap, and I'll just take off the X off the end there, and then down to where we set the position here, we're going to go visible size dot width minus settings gap, and visible size dot height also minus settings gap, just so that we've got it up in the top right hand corner. Obviously one more thing we need to do then here is in the touch reception we need to actually be able to run the scene. But before we do that, you need to declare the scene. So inside here we'll just, inside constants.h, we'll just go kscene and settings and make that a 2. And then inside hello world scene.cpp what we'll say is if we've had a tap, if we've tapped the robin, then do whatever otherwise, and what we'll say is if, and the, could have done an else if there I suppose, if the game started is false, so we haven't started a game, we're not in a game, we can say that if the settings label and then bounding box dot contains point tap, then we'll tell our game manager to run the correct scene. Now I just want to check that we've got the game manager here. Yes, we have. Okay, so we'll say cgame manager and instance and run scene and kscene settings. What we'll also do there is play the tap sound as well just before that. So that allows us then to run our settings scene. Of course we don't actually have a settings scene inside the switch statement in the game manager where we actually come to running a scene. Where is the function? It's somewhere here, run scene. At the moment we're only dealing with the splash scene, and that's because we haven't added a settings scene. Well, in the download for this, for the code for this, you'll find the settings scene, and I've already added it into the project. And the reason I've done that is because if I go to the header file here, we're not really seeing anything new at all. And there's quite a bit of code to type out because there are a lot of labels and it's stuff that we've covered, and to be honest it bored me to tears actually typing it all out, and it would be even worse for somebody watching it in the video who's already seen these things before. So I'm just going to press build now to build the application, because it's just dawning on me that I've dropped the code in here from another preparation project without actually checking that I've missed something off, and I haven't filled in all of the code. But let's just go over the header file here. So we've got our standard settings layer here that's subclassing the CC layer class, and then we've got down the bottom, I just want to add back in this a little bit so I can scroll up. We've got down the bottom then the overrides for the touches and our scene and the init. So everything here is familiar. And you'll see what the screen looks like shortly, but I've added some functions in here. This is just to shorten the code a bit for adding the labels, because we have various labels, as you can see here. Sorry, 3 labels here that are added, and there are more labels added inside. Basically how it works is we show the value with the plus or minus button and also a label saying what it is. So I've got 3 labels here which we need to respond to either a touch or to have their value changed, and here I've got 4 CC recs defined, and the reason I've done that is on smaller screens the plus or minus labels will be quite small. So what I do is I actually adjust and make the boxes surrounding those labels bigger so that they'll definitely be easy to touch, and then store that box in these boxes like so. You'll see that in the code. And then I've already defined some functions to increment the effects volume and the music volume, and a function to set the values on the labels. Now I'm sorry I've done a copy and paste here, but really in this case there's really no alternative because it's simply stuff that's been covered already. So if we go into the code step by step, this is why I didn't type it all out. So we've got the init function then, and it's all standard stuff with some gaps left already. I set up all the labels here in terms of creating the labels we need, and then using the add label at position I created this function here which basically takes a pointer to the label, its position, its Z index and its anchor point, sets the color to red and adds it to our layer. So it's nothing that you haven't seen before. And then here I'm just setting for the plus and minus buttons to increment or decrement a volume. I'm just making sure that I increase by a set amount that's proportional to the labels on the screen, the bounding boxes, so they're easy to touch. So all I'm doing here is storing the boxes, the bounding boxes of each of the labels in question, but adjusting the size of those boxes so they receive touches a bit easier. So that should be self-explanatory. If it's not, pop a comment in the comments section, but it's stuff that we've done before many times over already in this project. And the last thing I call at the bottom is this set label values. And all this does here is simply sets the music volume and effects volume by getting the value from the game manager, and sets the appropriate label string to that value brutally as a number. What I haven't filled in is the incrementing of the volume and the music volume and the effects volume. We'll come to that in a minute. Here we've got the touches began, so we've got play tap is false, and the reason is because I use this at the bottom to say if we've tapped something, then let's play our tap effect from the game manager, which I say down the bottom here. And otherwise it's simply a question of saying we've had a touch, was it the back button? If it was, then run our game scene. Was it increment the effects? If so, increment effects with +1, otherwise -1. Otherwise, was it the music plus, the volume +1 and -1, and so on. So that's all we really need to do there. So that should all be fairly self-explanatory and not very difficult code to understand, which is why I've gone through it so quickly. So let's get down to the last little bit we need to do, which is filling in these incrementing of the effects here. So to increment the effects volume, we'll get the current volume. So current effects volume equals, and then we'll say CGame manager and instance, and again Xcode has lost it, so I'm just going to save this and close this quickly and reopen the project, because again Xcode has lost its indexing for reasons that are beyond me. So I can see it's loading the indexing again. Good. So CGame manager instance, and then we want to get the effects volume like so. And now we've got that effects volume, we need to see that if we're incrementing minus, we need to check that it's not already 0. So if the current effects volume, in fact, let's say if, to make it a bit easier to read, if the increment equals, equals -1, and the current effects volume's got to be at least 1. So we've got to say that it's greater than 0, otherwise there's no point in doing this. Then we'll go CGameManager, instance, and we'll say set effects volume at the current effects volume -1, like so. Otherwise, we'll say else, and then I'm just going to copy and paste this code here to speed things up a bit. If the inc equals 1, so we're going +1, and the current volume is less than 10, which is our max, then we'll set this to the current effects volume +1. And the last thing we need to do at the bottom of here, of course, is then set the label values to the correct value. So I'll take this code here now, and we're going to drop this in here for the music, except I'll now change this to current music volume, is the get music volume, and just replace these all in here as they're required. And I do need to do a couple more things as well, so I need to set the music volume instead of obviously the effects volume. And the other thing I need to do is I want to say when we're decreasing here that if the current value, the current music volume equals 1, then we're actually turning the music off. So what we'll do is we'll say CGameManager instance and stop background music. And likewise, if we're incrementing from a 0 to a 1, so if the current music volume was 0 and we're increasing, then we want to start our background music. So that's all we actually need to do to have the incrementing working of the effects and the music volume. So I'll just build this and make sure it all builds. And last but not least, we need to go into the CGameManager and set up the running of our settings scene. So I'll say K-scene settings, and then we will play, and I need to put in here, of course, the include for C settings scene. So here it will be C settings layer and scene. So now if I run the application, and we have our splash, and now we'll have some music, I imagine. And now if I go into settings, you'll see everything's at 5. And now I can reduce the volume, it's dropping there, you see, of the music, and I can turn it off completely by going to 0 and change the volume, as you can hear there, and turn it off completely. And the same as with the effects, the click gets quieter or goes to nothing and gets louder as I go up to 10. It's a very simple settings screen, but something we need because of the hardware volume adjust that isn't present in the 2 point whatever versions of Cocos2dx. The only thing this isn't doing, of course, is saving our most recent settings. So that's it then for this video. We've implemented the settings screen okay, our game seems to be working relatively well, and we've got crash sounds and things like that, and scoring going, and the splash screen. The only thing we need to deal with now is the different resolutions that will be presented with a huge amount of different Android devices, and also including obviously the low and ultra high definition graphics. So that's it for this one. Thanks so much for watching, and comments, questions, criticisms welcome as always on YouTube.